What would you do if the very path you carved to save your people, to deliver them from suffering, became a superhighway to your own damnation? What would you do if the triumphs of your own reason sowed the seeds of a nightmare so profound that only the most irrational act of faith could unravel it? This is not a fairy tale of good versus evil, nor is it a myth of a people punished by their gods. No, this story is far more tragic, far more real. It is the story of a people who eagerly signed their own death warrant. It is a chronicle buried by the sands of time, a tale of pride, of collapse, and of a redemption that came from the most unexpected of places. The journey we are about to embark on will challenge everything you think you know about strength and weakness, about hope and despair. And I promise you, its conclusion will be unlike anything you can imagine. So, before we journey together through the veil of the past, do me a favor, leave a comment and let me know right now where in the world you are and what time it is for you. I want to know that from the cities that never sleep to the quietest villages, we are all listening together to the echoes of history. And now, take a deep breath. The story begins. The sun was not a sphere of fire in the sky above the Makara salt flats. It was a punishing eye, an unblinking, searing gaze that poured its molten fury upon the carcass of an ancient sea, dead for millennia. There were no romantic golden sands here, only an agonizingly white expanse of crystallized salt, fractured into a million hexagonal shards like God's shattered mirror. The air did not carry warmth. It carried the bitter taste of salt and corrosion. Every gust of wind did not just chafe the skin, it carried a fine, abrasive dust that worked its way into every thread of clothing, that clung to eyelashes and left the taste of utter despair on the tongue. Amidst this white apocalypse, the tribe of Ash moved. They were no longer a people. They were a scar crawling across the face of the earth. They were the last survivors of a great cataclysm that had erased their homeland, a people who had wandered for 40 years, clinging to a promise of a promised land, a green oasis that now existed only in their fading dreams. 40 years is long enough to wear down mountains, let alone the will of men and women. Hope, which had once been a blazing torch to light their way, was now a guttering ember, threatening to be extinguished by their own weary breath. Leading this miserable procession was Kaelen. He was not a king, nor was he a warrior. He was simply an elder, a man whose hair had taken on the color of ash, whose slender shoulders stooped under an invisible, crushing weight. That weight was not merely the burden of leadership, it was the weight of the silence from the God he so faithfully worshipped. Every night he prayed, and the only answer was the wail of the wind across the salt pans. Every morning, he looked into the eyes of his people and saw a hollowing void, a skepticism that grew like a tumor. He felt their pain as if it were his own. Their gnawing hunger made his own stomach clench. He was the bearer of faith, but that faith was being tested to its absolute limit, for it could conjure neither bread nor water. It could only offer patience, and patience in this forsaken desert was a synonym for death. While Kaelen was submerged in the burden of silence, another fire was raging fiercely within the camp. A fire of impatience, of youthful vigor, of raw, uncompromising reason. That fire had a name, Malakor. He was no elder. Malakor was a warrior, the chief of the war council, a man with biceps as hard as salt rock and eyes that burned like the midday sun. He had been born in the desert, raised on hardship, and he did not believe in anything he could not touch or conquer. To Malakor, Kaelen's patience was weakness. His prayers were the whispers of a coward. One afternoon, as the relentless heat began to subside, but the dense despair only thickened, Malakor stood in the center of the camp. His voice boomed, strong and clear, cutting through the mournful wind. "Brothers and sisters of the tribe of Ash, look around you. He swept a powerful arm across the gaunt faces, the cracked lips. Kaelen tells us we must have faith. But does faith fill the empty belly of your son? Does faith soothe the burning throat of your mother? We have waited 40 years. Where is Kaelen's God? Or has he forgotten us, left us to wither and die in this white grave? Every word from Malakor was like a javelin, striking deep into the fear and exhaustion that had festered for so long in every heart. They began to murmur, and nods of agreement rippled through the crowd. Kaelen emerged from his tent, his face serene but his eyes heavy with sorrow. "Malakor," he said, his voice low and raspy. "Impatience is the most dangerous trap in this desert. It is more fearsome than hunger or thirst." Malakor scoffed, a laugh of pure pride and defiance. "Passivity is the trap, old man. While you wait for a miracle from the heavens, I believe in the miracle of our own two hands." He turned back to the crowd, his voice rising to a crescendo. "Our ancestors left us ancient scrolls, records that say beneath this salt, deep in the earth, there are eternal aquifers. They sealed them for reasons we cannot know. But the time has come to save ourselves. We have the tools, we have the strength. Tonight we will not pray. Tonight we will act. We will drill into this cursed earth and force it to give us life." A roar went up, the first in many long months. It was the roar of desperate people who had found a tangible goal, a visible spark of hope. They no longer wanted to wait for a distant redemption. They wanted to forge their own. Kaelen tried to intervene. "Do not do this, Malakor. There are seals that must never be broken. The ancestors had their reasons. That is wisdom, not fear." But his words were drowned out by the chant of Malakor's name. The crowd, led by the fire of reason and the promise of water, swarmed to the center of the camp. They brought forth drills of obsidian, levers made from the bones of dead beasts. Their eyes shone with a fanatical light. They believed they were marching toward salvation. They had no idea they were eagerly digging their own graves. Kaelen stood alone, his shadow long on the salt-crusted ground, a figure of faith left behind. He could only look to the sky, and for the first time in a long time, he did not pray for his people. He prayed for what was about to happen to them. Under Malakor's zealous command, the work began. Dozens of strong warriors took turns operating the ancient drill. The sound of stone pounding against the granite-hard salt crust was jarring, a dry, grating shriek. Their sweat poured out, only to be instantly evaporated by the saline air, leaving white streaks on their sun-darkened skin. They labored like madmen, driven by the most primal of urges, the will to live. Malakor stood upon a large salt rock, a general commanding a charge. He roared encouragement, his voice never flagging. "Deeper, harder, our destiny lies beneath our feet, not in the sky." After hours of brutal labor, as the moon began its cold, indifferent ascent, a sharp crack echoed from below. It wasn't the sound of salt breaking, it was the sound of something ancient, a solid structure being breached. Everyone held their breath. The drill was through. They hastily pulled the drill up. A strange silence fell over the camp. All eyes were fixed on the black, gaping hole they had created. They waited for a geyser of water to erupt, for the sound of life. But nothing happened. A curious warrior peered down. "There is no water," he said, his voice laced with disappointment. Malakor frowned, disbelieving. He pushed the warrior aside and looked down himself. It was true, only a deep, impenetrable darkness. But then he felt something, a draft, not a wind, but a current of frigid air carrying an indescribable scent. It smelled of millennial dust, of imprisoned decay, and of something else, something horrifically alive. The camp was plunged into the silence of disappointment. The cheers had died. The flame of hope Malakor had lit was extinguished as quickly as it had been kindled. One by one, the people returned to their tents. the bitter taste of a futile effort in their mouths. They had been wrong. Malakor had been wrong. He stood there by the fateful hole, his pride wounded. But that was not the worst of it. The worst was yet to come. As the last figures disappeared into their tents, a tiny sound emerged from the hole. A soft, clicking sound. Then another, like small pebbles skittering against one another. Malakor didn't notice. He was too consumed by his failure. He turned and walked away. It was his final mistake of the night. Because from the darkness of that hole, the thing they had unleashed was not water. It was a judgment. It was something that had been sealed away for a very good reason, and now it was free. Nightfall in the Makara desert did not bring rest. It brought a terror that no one in the tribe of Ash could have possibly conceived. As the last campfires died down from the hole that Malakor's pride had dug, the first creatures began to emerge. They were not snakes, nor were they spiders. They were the very embodiment of the desert itself, cold, beautiful, and lethal. They were the crystal scorpions. Their carapaces were not made of chitin, but of a crystalline mineral, transparent and glittering malevolently under the moonlight. Their every step made a soft, clicking sound, the lullaby of death. They did not move with haste. They slithered with a cold confidence, fanning out across the sleeping camp, shimmering messengers of an inescapable judgment. The first victim was a guard who had dozed off by a dying fire. A scorpion crawled silently onto his leg. He felt nothing. Its crystalline tail arched, and its stinger, sharp as a shard of glass, pricked his skin. The guard merely flinched, as if from a common insect bite. He brushed it away, mumbled something, and drifted back to sleep. But the venom was already in his veins. It did not burn, it did not cause fever, it was cold. A coldness that began to spread from the sting, traveling up his veins not like fire but like ice. He began to shiver, but not from the external chill. The cold was coming from within. He opened his eye, tried to move, but his limbs were becoming stiff. A look of supreme horror dawned in his eyes as he realized he could no longer move. He wanted to scream, but his vocal cords had frozen. He could only watch as his skin began to lose its color, becoming translucent. Watch as the veins beneath turned into faint blue lines, as if he were turning into a glass statue. The petrification had begun. His blood and flesh were slowly transmuting into crystalline salt. He was being frozen from the inside out, fully conscious, in absolute terror. As the first light of dawn broke, the first scream tore through the desert silence. It was not a scream of pain, but of pure, unadulterated horror. A woman stepped out of her tent and saw the guard. He was still sitting there in his sleeping posture, but he was now a perfect statue of crystalline salt, glittering in the morning sun, a sculpture of death. Panic erupted like a plague. People poured from their tents to witness a hellish scene. All around the camp were human statues. A mother clutching her child, both turned to crystal in an eternal embrace. An old man reaching for a water skin, his hand frozen forever just inches away. Each statue was a silent testament to the last moments of life, an exhibition of horror. The death was cold, and it was grotesquely beautiful. Malakor burst from his tent. He froze. Kaelen's warning echoed in his mind like a thunderclap. There are seals that must never be broken. His plan of salvation, the act of reason he had championed, had not brought water. It had unleashed a crystal nightmare. He looked at the statues, his comrades, his neighbors, the people who had trusted and followed him. His pride, which he thought was as solid as rock, began to crack. The weight of his guilt crashed down upon him, heavier than any stone. What had he done? While the camp descended into chaos and screaming, Kaelen emerged from his tent. His face was unnervingly calm, but his eyes held a deep, profound pain. He did not look at the statues. He looked at the living, who were running in every direction with nowhere to hide. Because the enemy was not an army, it was a legion of small, glittering scorpions, hiding in the shadows, under blankets, in the cracks of the earth, just waiting for their moment. Malakor, in a fit of desperation, ran to Kaelen. "Do something, old man," he screamed, his voice breaking with horror and remorse. "Pray, do anything." Kaelen simply looked at him, a gaze devoid of blame, filled only with tragedy. "Now you believe in prayer, Malakor. Prayer cannot shatter crystal. Your actions set them free. My faith cannot lock them away again." Kaelen's words were a knife to Malakor's heart. He collapsed onto the salt-crusted ground, clutching his head. For the first time in his life, the mightiest warrior of the tribe of Ash felt utterly powerless. He had tried to seize destiny with his own two hands, and in doing so, he had crushed it. The battle between faith and reason was over, and reason had lost catastrophically. An entire people were paying the price for one man's pride. That day, no one dared to move. They barricaded themselves in their tents, holding their breath, listening to the deadly clicking sound outside. The fear was worse than death itself. It was a slow-acting poison for the mind. Malakor sat motionless in his tent, staring into nothingness. He was no longer a warrior. He was a ghost, haunted by the crystal statues he had created. Meanwhile, Kaelen was not idle. He went to the deepest part of his tent, where he kept the last relics of his ancestors. He did not pray for an easy deliverance. He knew that a wound inflicted by hubris could not be healed with a simple miracle. He prayed for guidance. He prayed for a path, no matter how difficult that path might be. And there, amidst the tempest of despair that engulfed the camp, in the silence of his tent, a revelation came to Kaelen. It was not a voice from the heavens. It was an understanding that flashed into his mind, as clear and sharp as a crystal shard. An idea both terrifying and extraordinary, a command so illogical, so cruel, yet it was the only glimmer of hope. Kaelen stepped outside, his face no longer tragic, but set with grim determination. He walked directly to Malakor's tent. The young warrior was still sitting there, his eyes lifeless. "Get up, Malakor," Kaelen said. Malakor looked up, his eyes empty. "For what? To watch more people turn to stone?" "No," Kaelen replied, his voice firm. "To forge a redemption." Kaelen explained the revelation. The command was clear. Take a crystal from one of the victims, melt it in the hottest fire, and from that material of death, you will forge an image of destruction itself. You will cast a crystal scorpion and raise it high upon a staff. Anyone who is stung, if they look upon it, will live. Upon hearing this, Malakor laughed. It was a hysterical, broken sound, full of anguish and despair. "You are mad. Old man, you have truly lost your mind. Use the very thing that kills us to save us, to look upon the image of that monster to be healed. It is an insult. It is the cruelest joke. It is the only way," Kaelen stated, unflinching in the face of Malakor's scorn. "Faith is not always logical, Malakor. Sometimes it demands that we abandon reason in order to live." Kaelen turned away without another word. He walked to one of the nearest statues, a young warrior who had once served under Malakor. With a painful reverence, Kaelen took a stone hammer and gently tapped a crystal shard from the statue's arm. It fell to the ground, glittering in the sun like a frozen tear. He carried it to his tent, where the tribe's only forge awaited. All that day, Kaelen worked alone. He cast the shard into the fire. It did not melt like metal. It hissed and resisted, emitting a cold, eerie light. But Kaelen was patient, stoking the fire to its highest temperature. Slowly, the substance of death began to yield. The solid crystal turned into a viscous, shimmering liquid like mercury. With hands that were old but steady, he poured the liquid into a clay mold he had prepared, a mold in the perfect shape of a scorpion with its tail poised to strike. As night fell once more, bringing with it its now familiar terror, Kaelen emerged from his tent. In his hands was a wooden staff, and mounted on its top, gleaming, was the newly forged crystal scorpion. It was no longer transparent. The heat of the forge had turned it a jet black, as polished as obsidian, but a cold light still seemed to be trapped within it. He walked to the center of the camp and drove the staff hard into the ground. It stood there, a monument of contradiction, the image of death created to bring life. And then, at that very moment, fate delivered its final, most brutal blow to Malakor's pride. A shrill scream pierced the air, but this time it did not come from a stranger's tent. It came from his own. Malakor's blood ran cold. He shot into his tent like an arrow. His wife was clutching their only son, a boy of 5, her face a mask of terror. On the back of the boy's hand was a small sting mark, and from it, the cold, crystalline veins were already beginning to spread. A scorpion had found its way inside. This was the sharpest point of the tragedy. All of Malakor's theories, all of his mockery, all of his pride evaporated. Now it was not the tribe, not an anonymous soldier. It was his own flesh and blood, his future. Malakor, the mightiest warrior, the man who believed in action and strength, was now utterly helpless before the cold death that was slowly claiming his son. He grabbed the boy, felt the life warmth already seeping away, being replaced by the chill of crystal. He let out a roar, a sound of pure animal agony that seemed to tear the very fabric of the desert. His wife, in her desperation, pointed to the staff standing tall in the center of the camp. "Malakor, the staff," Kaelen said. "Look at it." Reason screamed in Malakor's head. "Absurd, foolish, how can looking at a toy save my son?" But as he looked down at his boy's face, at the light fading from his eyes, he knew that reason was worthless. Paternal love, that most primal and powerful instinct, rose up and crushed the last vestiges of his pride. He scooped his petrifying son into his arms and ran from the tent, stumbling toward the center of the camp. People parted, watching the scene in horror. Malakor fell to his knees before the staff, before the very symbol he had ridiculed only hours before. He lifted his defiant eyes, the eyes that had once challenged God himself, now streaming with tears. He did not look with curiosity or doubt. He looked with all of his desperation, his remorse, and one final flickering ember of faith, a faith born of boundless love. He looked directly at the crystal scorpion. And in that moment, a miracle occurred. The crystal scorpion atop the staff seemed to come alive. The cold light trapped within it suddenly flared, not with a blinding glare, but with a soft, gentle radiance that spread out and enveloped Malakor and his son. It was not warm, nor was it cold. It was simply light. Malakor felt it. He felt a change. The petrification on his son's body abruptly halted. The crystalline veins on his hands stopped spreading. Then slowly, miraculously, they began to recede. Like frost melting in the morning sun, color returned to the boy's skin. His shallow breaths became steady. The deathly chill was replaced by the warmth of life. But the one who was truly healed was not just the boy. As Malakor watched his son's eyes flutter open and heard him weakly whisper, "Father," something inside him shattered, not his heart. It was the wall of pride he had spent his entire life building. That wall crumbled, turning to dust. He clutched his son, and for the first time in years, Malakor wept. He wept not from grief, but from gratitude. He wept for his own foolishness and for the immeasurable mercy he had just received. He had been granted redemption, not by his own strength, but by the humblest act of obedience, the act of looking up. The light from the staff continued to glow, a beacon in the sea of salt. The others, those who had been stung and were hiding in fear, witnessed the miracle. They began to emerge hesitantly, guiding their loved ones toward the staff, and one by one, with the simple act of looking up in faith, they were healed. The sounds of screaming were replaced by cries of joy. The terror was replaced by a holy awe. The deadly desert had become the cathedral of a great miracle. When the sun finally rose on a reborn camp, Malakor, with his son sleeping peacefully in his arms, walked slowly toward Kaelen. There was no defiance in his eyes. There was no pride in his posture. He gently laid his son down, and then, before the entire tribe of Ash, the mightiest warrior slowly, deliberately, knelt on one knee before the old elder. It was not an act of submission. It was an act of profound respect, of sincere repentance and of acknowledgement. He said not a word, but in that single gesture Kaelen understood everything. He understood that Malakor had not only been cured of the venom of pride, but had been reborn. Kaelen smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. He did not let Malakor kneel for long. He placed a hand on his shoulder and helped him to his feet. "Rise, Malakor," he said, his voice warm. "The tribe needs a warrior, not a penitent. But from now on, they will not have just one leader. They will have two." From that day forward, a great change took place. The tribe of Ash was no longer divided by two opposing philosophies. They were united by one costly lesson. They had two leaders. Kaelen, with his wisdom and deep faith, became the heart of the tribe, the moral compass, the one who set the course. And Malakor, with his strength and courage, now tempered by humility, became the hands of the tribe, the one who acted, the one who protected. Faith and action were no longer at war. They were intertwined, complementing each other, creating a whole far stronger than they had ever been apart. Together, they led their people out of the Makara salt flats, not as fugitives, but as survivors who had been forged in fire and redeemed by a miracle. They had learned the most important lesson of all, that the greatest strength lies not in forcing the world to bend to your will, but in knowing when to trust a design far greater than your own, even when your reason screams in protest. Life, my friends, is never found at the extremes. It is not found in absolute blind faith, nor is it found in absolute prideful action. It is born at the intersection, where the hands of action know when to fold in quiet humility, and the heart of faith knows when to beat loudly to guide those hands. The story of the crystal judgment teaches us an eternal truth. Sometimes, to be truly saved, the thing we must give up is not our life, but our ego. The seal we must break is not in the world outside, but the seal of doubt within our own souls. And now I want to ask you one final question. In your life, have you ever been caught in your own desert, torn between the Kaelen of belief and the Malakor of action? Between faith and reason, what is the crystal scorpion that you have had to face? Take a moment and share the battle within your own soul in the comments below. Because every story shared is another torch lighting the way for others who are also wandering in a desert of their own. If stories like this, these journeys through the dust of time, mean something to you, then become a part of our channel. Hit that subscribe button, because every new subscriber is another companion on this great journey to uncover the profound lessons that history has left for us. Thank you for listening.